So I am going to turn on the recording now. We also sponsor UX San Antonio, and these days all of our events are remote. So you're all welcome to attend UX San Antonio events, even if you're not based in San Antonio. Coming up on Monday, March 8th from 6 to 7 p.m. Central Time, we have a design language system workshop with Jim Curry. It's the second of a multi-part series, but the sessions are independent. This one on Monday night is going to be systems, headers, and buttons. And then on Thursday, JJ Melendez is leading us in a discussion of the movie, The Social Dilemma. So if you crave meeting up with others and talking about that movie, which I have seen and found fascinating, you're welcome to join us. Next month's Firecat First Friday is going to be April 2nd. And our presenter is a wonderful friend of mine, Leslie O'Flahaven. She runs a company called eWrite Online, and she's going to be talking to us about writing content in plain language. So I hope you can join us for that. I am going to kick us off and introduce our special guest presenter today, Judy Cotter. I've worked with Judy. She is so smart and talented. I've worked with her for many years, and she has led design teams at a large financial services organization. Many of our team met each other there, and we worked on the same types of problems. And I want to tell you, Judy is a master of UX innovation, and she's really good at digging down into the so what. So not just finding out opportunities, but crafting a way forward, how to attack them in a way that makes business sense. She is joining us from Possum Kingdom, Texas, and I am not kidding. If you've never heard of Possum Kingdom, it's a wonderful place that is a lake. So she's lucky enough to be joining us from her lake house. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Judy and turn off my video so we can focus on her.
Thank you, Susan. I'm really excited to be here today with you all. Yes, I'm in the middle of nowhere, Texas. It's pretty much west of Fort Worth by about an hour and a half. So if you're trying to find me on a map, that's where I am. So I'm going to take everyone through service design, some fundamentals of what service design is, why you should do it, and the different components that make up some of the key tools that we use when we're doing service design. So Susan did a great job of introducing me to you guys. I've worked with Susan for quite several years and have participated in TEDx San Antonio with Susan, as well as working alongside her at Firecat Studios. So I'm really excited to be here today. So service design, what is it and why should you do it? So what I've got in store for today is walking through a few definitions. We're also going to talk about a case study that I'm bringing forward from some work that I did in the past. And then I'm going to step us through a quick activity, and hopefully we will be able to accomplish all of this in an hour and still have time for a few Q&A moments. So what is it? So service design is the practice of designing all end user touch points into a seamless choreography of planned outcomes. So fundamentally, service design is a concept that every touch point a customer uses to engage with a company is designed with a known or predictive outcome in concert with the entire system. So making sure that you're not just focusing on one aspect of a service, but looking at everything that makes up all those components. Service design is being intentional, planning those outcomes from those nodes of interaction to have choreographed planned level of engagement at every point. And that also, almost more importantly, means the in-between points. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So what is a service? Well, these are a few examples of what a service is. So technically speaking, it's a service that is a value exchange when there's no tangible product involved. So advice is something that you get when you go to a consultant and get some feedback, right? A friend of mine, Jamin Hageman, who is the service design director, UX lead for Capital One, said this in a post earlier, and he describes service as anything that you can get from a company that you cannot drop on your foot. So you can't drop advice on your foot. Insurance is a good example. Also, it's a promise that when circumstances come together, that the insurance company is making a promise to you to make things whole. Utilities is also a really good example. I think we all have very recent experiences when our services get interrupted, and that and the impact that those services can have. Yes, you know, like water is tangible, but having running water in your house that's warm that you can take a shower in is a slightly different, right? And so having all of those things come together and making sure that you have those things available at any given time is what we mean by a service. So another question that comes up a lot is when I'm talking about service design is how service design is different than UI and UX. So I'm going to step through that just really quickly, just so we're on the same page, at least for this 1 hour, that we're all using the same song sheet here. So UI is having a designer, one moment. There you go. UX is having a designer that designs the interactions on the glass, and how an interface looks is important. So it includes the look and feel of an individual touch point. And I've included maybe documents here because sometimes like a letter going out or an email going out or a mailer going out is also a touch point that has to be designed. And so that particular, what all goes into creating that particular touch point is considered UI for at least this conversation. So UX is the usability and the design of the interaction throughout that particular touch point. So looking at a mobile device and a mobile interaction, how does the user move through that interaction, and how are they successful or unsuccessful in moving through that? It also includes the look and feel, but it's really the overall takeaway from the user. Are they able to conduct the business that they were trying to do? Are they getting the job done that they came to do? Whereas service design is really looking at all of those touch points in a system. So making sure that what you say on the website is what your customer service reps are saying on the phone. What you find in your email and on your account page is what the service rep says on the phone, and everything in between. So if you're going to a point of sale location like a retail, how is that all playing together? As you see on the bottom too, I also have maybe the organizational structure of the organization. That we're going to talk a little bit more about how that might have an impact on your experience of the service that you provide. And also regulatory bodies also have an influence. And these two things we're going to talk a little bit more about because they're often not considered as strongly as some of those other supporting features that create part of the service. So we're going to move on. So service design is a human-centered practice. So a lot of the tools that we use are similar for other UX and UI methodologies, right? So we use the same tools like research, establishing customer journey maps, doing ecosystem mapping. So all of those things are still used in service design, but it's really the focus and what we're trying to understand and what to do with that information that differentiates service design. So just a little more exploration about what's different between maybe a customer journey map and a service blueprint that we're going to get into here in a minute is a customer journey map walks a typical customer through a journey, documenting the tasks or steps experienced by the customer, as well as what the customer is thinking, feeling, and doing as they traverse through your experience. This helps identify what the experience highs and lows are throughout the journey. A service blueprint is a way to identify the building blocks that hold up or create that experience. So who are the players in this? What are the systems, and what are the other influences on the experience? So these are both tools that we use to document and communicate to stakeholders and to operations. So let's dig in a little bit on how blueprints were inspired. So if we look at a traditional look at company departments and company silos, we see all these different departments and they have their own job to do. But what we don't realize sometimes is how they have an influence on the user experience. So let's just pivot this really quickly. And then we see that they build on each other and they support the customer experience. So however those handoffs are between departments, whatever regulatory influences are on the system, those all bubble up to impact the customer experience. So we're going to talk a little bit about now, how do we compartmentalize these and look at how we address those? So we're going to talk about blueprint building blocks. The first thing we want to focus on are customer actions. What are the customers doing to interact with your company or organization? What actions are they taking? What are they thinking before they take that action? What's the call to action for them? Like, I need to pay my water bill. So what is that first trigger to have them start thinking about your company or organization? Then how do they do that? What are the touch points that they use to get the job done, to accomplish what they're trying to do? And think about all of those tangible interactions. So things like, do you have a brick and mortar location? Do you have a mobile app? Do you have a website? What can they do on that website? Is this informational, or can they buy things? What is that? What does that comprise of? Is there some fulfillment to that purchase? What does your customer service folks do and say on the phone? So those are all different touch points. And then we need to talk about staff action. So I mentioned customer service reps, and also you have your frontline folks at any brick and mortar location. And so how are your staff actions playing into that role? What kind of training are they getting? What kind of licensing do they have? What are their requirements for their job? And then how do you enable them to do that job? So those are all considered the front stage of the building blocks. Let's look at the backstage. So backstage are any employees or functions that are behind the scenes. So maybe your back office, maybe you have a fulfillment aspect of your business, all of those backstage individuals that provide that support to fulfilling what the customer has purchased or engaged with. And then we have supporting processes. So things like the organization itself, you have marketing, you have actually HR, you have, like I mentioned, those regulatory bodies. So a lot of times, especially my experience with the financial industry, there are a lot of things that we would have liked to have done, but because of regulations, we couldn't, or it was constrained. So then what were the opportunities within those constraints that we could enhance the experience with? So just a little bit more digging into what we mean by front stage. So think about when you go to a restaurant, you think about the ambiance of the location, you think about the types of food that you're that's on the menu. You think about the menu itself, how is that presented? What is the type of service that you're going to get? Is it going to be, white table, or is it cafeteria style? So what are those different components that make up the experience of your food, of your dining experience? So then thinking about backstage is everything that's happening behind the scenes. So thinking about backstage of a restaurant, I think of working with purveyors to source the food that is on the menus. You have the chef, you have the other cooks in the kitchen. You also have support staff, you have management, you have scheduling, you have HR. You have to pay for the lease of the location or the purchase of the location. So all of those things have an influence to the experience at hand. So why should you spend time really focusing on this? So Bain & Company did a survey, and they surveyed 362 firms. And they found that 80% of those companies believe that they delivered a superior experience to their customers. So then Bain did the same thing, only different. They asked their customers about their own perception. And they found a different story. They found that only 8% of companies were really delivering on that service. So that's a 72% disconnect between what the companies thought they were providing and what the customers felt that they were receiving. So that is why we want to close that delivery gap and really focus on making sure that what the customers are experiencing really stands up to the promise that the companies are making. So at my time at the financial services company, I worked in the mortgage experience. And one of the things that one of my executives said to me was, you know, what we make improvements all of the time. We're making end-to-end, you know, point-to-point improvements all of the time. Why is the experience not getting better? I don't understand. Like, there's a lot of investments in making this piece better or that piece better. And a lot of times when you're making those point-to-point improvements, what's not taken into consideration is the impact on the whole experience. Especially, like I said, the in-between times, the handoffs, the moving from one platform to another. Customers transition depending on their situation from mobile to desktop to what they're reading on your mailers, and then what they hear and discuss with your customer service reps. So we see a lot of this when a company or an organization says, oh, we need a more mobile app, right? I've heard that several times over the past years, and it seems to be a common thread. And so, but the challenge with that is when they really focus on maybe a new access point, but the back-end systems and the delivery systems are still in an analog or a manual state. So the back-end system hasn't been modernized to deliver on the promise of a sleek digital interface. So putting energy into a shiny object instead of looking at the friction points and trying to understand what's causing those friction points to happen could be detrimental to the experience, because you're putting energy into making something new when really some adjustments to what's existing might be in line. So sometimes it's not a technology issue. Sometimes it's a lack of modernization issue. Sometimes it's a departmental communication issue. So this really breaking it down into blocks is really an important way to identify where those gaps might lie. So that kind of goes right into, well, how can I use this service blueprint? And it is a really good communication tool. Once you have all of the touch points and back-end systems documented, it becomes a workhorse of a communication tool, because then you can take it to your stakeholders and they can become aware of the simplicity or the complexity of an interaction. It's also a planning tool based on identified service moments. I'm going to get into that a little bit more in a minute. Any service moments that fail to deliver on the expected experience, then you can gather teams around that and come up with a solution and see how that new solution fits into your existing development plan. It's also an operations tool. It creates a collaboration tool with operations. So one of the key steps is going back. Once you have these steps documented, you can, it's best to go back and validate all the steps and the players and the systems that are captured and make sure that they're in the correct order. And so these validation steps with different departments is a great opportunity to communicate and again, just get on the same page, making sure that everything is documented. It's also, on several occasions, it's the best way to realize that you've missed something completely, because that has happened to me. Is, we spent a lot of time working on this, and all of a sudden we go back to validate and we get but what about this? And you're like, whoops, let's get that documented. And so you can add that to the blueprint. It's also a diagnostic tool. So because it's a visualization of all the steps, you can really look at the cluster of steps into a particular phase and say, I think there's a problem here, or this is where we know we have a friction point, and you can see the different components that make up that experience of that service moment. And so that way you can rework it or reimagine what that needs to be. The other thing is, because a service blueprint is either sticky notes on a board or a digital representation of the flow, there's a lot of opportunity to take those building blocks and reorder them or eliminate them or replace them. And so that way you can spend some time looking at a proposed change to your service without having to spend a lot of time and energy in physically changing your experience. So I think this case study that I'm going to go through is really going to help solidify some of the concepts that I've been talking about. So I'm going to talk about an effort that my team worked on when a couple of years ago, and it was when internal security protocols were being changed, and how we at the time that we were first initially engaged, the project was already in progress, the technical design was already underway, the rollout of these new protocols was imminent, and of course there was no time, because that's how it rolls. And so I think I can say that is a common experience for most folks when working on new security. So the first thing we did is we kind of broke up the experience, kind of whiteboarded this out. We're like, okay, what are the different phases of the service that we're talking about? And so we realized that there was an awareness campaign, like an email, poster board type of communications campaign. There was an acquire campaign where people were there were cohorts of employees that were grouped together to start going through this switchover. And so there was getting them all on board and moving them forward.
Judy,
and then there were several security.
Can you just
Sure.
quickly recap who this design was for and what they were supposed to do?
Sure. So this was for security. So the large financial institution, right? So security is a very important aspect of keeping the members safe, members' information safe, and making sure that all of the employees were doing their part to gain access to the system in a way that no one else could. And they could only have access to particular aspects of the system that they used in their daily jobs. And so the security department was enhancing the security protocols. And so they were moving from a typical password access to a multi-factor authentication approach to access to the systems. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So we have the different layers of security. And then, so once they were in and had these devices and the protocols, then they had the daily usage of these protocols as they came in every morning, right, and signed onto the system. So what resulted from that? So this is what a service blueprint looks like. And I'm just going to take a minute so you can see the different phases. We made a blueprint for each of the different phases. And I'd like to take a few minutes to get your first impressions of what you think about what you're seeing on the page here. And if you have a few minutes, you can use the chat feature to just type in your first impression, and I'll give you a few moments to give me your thoughts on that. So it looks like a process flow chart. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, so it is part of it is documenting how things flow throughout the process. Overwhelming. Yeah, there's a lot of steps. Each one of the columns is basically a service moment. So think about, as an employee, having to go through all of these steps. So yes, it's overwhelming, but organized. Yes, thank you. So what's really interesting is being consistent on how you're setting this up is really, really facilitates identifying where those opportunities lie. And making things visible to all. Thanks. I really cannot express how important it is to get all of this on paper. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but we definitely saw some aha moments when we went through the exercise and documented everything and then shared it back with our team members and our partners. And they did not realize what they had created accidentally. So I think those are all key things. So let's go through what we did. So the first thing that we did in this effort was look at existing artifacts. So one of the things that we looked at was the security department had created an instruction sheet. They thought that they were putting together all of the pages, all of the step by step. The trouble was it was 14 pages long. And so one of the challenges that we had, we're like, wow, that's a lot of steps. And I started going through it. I'm like, wow, I'm confused. But let's test it with real users. And at the time, we really didn't have, we're kind of under a time crunch. And so we're like, well, you know what, let's just, we have a lot of IT folks that are participating in this. Let's just have some of them run through it. And we didn't think that was a good test, to be honest, because IT folks are very technically savvy. They usually know how to work things around. They usually know how to decipher some of this technical jargon. So we really didn't think it was going to be a good test, but we just wanted a quick first blush at what, how successful they would and how quickly they could get through this instruction sheet, because that was very important. Fortunately, unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, none of them could actually get through the instructions. So, and we thought that was pretty telling. So if IT professionals couldn't get through the instructions, the other professionals at the company were going to have issues as well. So we knew that this was something that we really had to dig deep on and see how we could redo, recast, reconstruct the guidance in how to enroll. The other thing is we had similar but different device enrollment sites. So the different layers of security were purveyed out to different security agencies. And so, but each one had their own enrollment site. And so, and each enrollment site had different levels of modernity in their website. So that was a problem. There was a disconnect with those two interfaces, but also what was really telling was these two different companies were using the same terms, but the terms had different meanings. And so when you traverse those two sites in succession, and the meaning of the words are different, it was very, very confusing for employees. They just didn't understand, and rightly so, because what it meant something meant something on one site, and then going to the next site, it meant something completely different. The other thing was the expectation that the insertion of using your own personal, phone to be part of security protocols. So getting that, 6-digit number to put into the interface. That there had never been an expectation, a universal expectation for every single employee to use their personal device as part of their work. And so that was met with mixed emotions from employees. And so that was something that had to be considered. So we did some research, and I'm going to try and go really quickly through this because of time. So I just want to make sure I'm just going to tap through these really quickly and not spend too much time on them. So we talked to employees, and I've highlighted things that I thought resonate. So in the awareness portion, they didn't really remember what was in the email. So that was their main communication. 10 minutes is too long to get those things enrolled. So being cognizant of, there was not a lot of appreciation for real world time constraints of the employees. They only had a few minutes. They had to be on the phone talking to customers. The complexity, even folks that felt like they were tech savvy felt like the steps were too difficult. And again, like I mentioned, having the expectation to use their own personal device. Typically, they had a desk phone or a voice over IP interaction so that they could talk to customers, but they didn't necessarily use their mobile phone in their work. And then this one in particular, the process took much longer every morning. And so I highlighted the point in the top that says, that it takes a little bit more time. And then at the bottom, it says it takes less than 2 seconds to type in my password and is 99% reliable. And I want to emphasize, this is where a real disconnect comes in, because to the employee, the password's fast, they know it, they type it in, and they're ready to go. Okay, so to her, reliability is gaining access into the system. But for the security perspective, it's not as secure as all those multi-factor authentication layers. And so that's a real disconnect. I never found an employee that did not want to be compliant. Nobody wants to be the hole in the boat, and nobody wants to be the one that let all the bad guys in. So making sure that you enable your employees to be compliant was really, really important. So bottom line, the steps were too complex and numerous, and the actions failed to deliver on the desired employee experience and improve security. So this statement kind of goes to both of those needs, right? The employee experience and getting to the improved security. So we did some collaboration. So we held a workshop, and I tell you, this was a great workshop we did with a security team, and we broke up the tables into the different phases. And there were several aha moments when we were stepping out all of these steps, where the back-end IT technical designers were like, oh, well, we can actually eliminate those 20 steps by doing it this way. they really had never considered what they were doing, how they were constructing the back end to have a front end impact. And so we had several aha moments where like, oh, well, we can just do this. We can make this technical choice versus that technical choice and make a positive impact to the experience. So that was one big aha that we had during that workshop. And the other one was sharing with them, with this team, that they were actually building a service. They were building the security service protocols for the company. And they had never really taken that into consideration. They're just doing their job. They're just building those layers of security without considering the fact that they were building a service for the employees. So that was a huge aha as well. So we're going to zoom in really quickly on one aspect. One in particular was the recovery from error as employees go through this process. And so we have the employee actions at the top, touch points, the front stage staff actions, and then the backstage. And so one of the things you want to look at when you're building this is, what are those service moments? So what in the stack, what completes a particular service? And so then you can identify, like, what are those touch points and why does it matter? And it's really important to do that, because when you look at a particular interaction, sometimes those service moments become a moment of truth. And a moment of truth is when the experience defines your brand to your employees or to your customers. And so failure on this particular touch point becomes paramount and has a big impact to your brand. The other thing that we identified, what's also really helpful, is we identified a gap. So in this particular instance, we had on-premise support at just 2 locations versus all the distributed locations. And so we realized that that's a gap, and we need to contend with that. So what do? Once you find an opportunity for improvement, then you can create an input to your plan. So what is that project? What do you want to build? What do you want to do? Put some description around it, and then you can start plugging that into your planning cycle. So by looking at all of the different touch points in the interactions, we realized that we needed to simplify the instructions. We needed to clean up some of the interactions on the mobile devices, as well as other websites, and work with our partners and our purveyors to make sure that those processes were clean and simple. And so then tying it together, you can take that current state blueprint and prototype it into the future state, create project cards that lead into your project roadmap, and then help you enhance or improve your touch points. So here's your takeaway for the day. Design your service purposely, or your customers will feel the effects of a service left to its own design. So I think I can't resonate enough that that is going to be really important, because unless you do it intentionally, you have a service. It's just that, have you really thought through all of those different touch points and how those interact? So we have about 15 minutes left, and we might go over a little bit. So if you need to leave at the top of the hour, feel free to do so, but I think we'll be able to carry on just a little bit past that. So I have a quick little activity. Many of us who, I am not near an HEB right now. The closest HEB is an hour away from me. And so, because I used to live in San Antonio, I had one around the corner. But we all have that shared experience. If you're in San Antonio, you have the concept of my HEB. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time, because we have this shared experience, to start documenting really quickly what those building blocks are. So we're going to use the chat feature again. So as I walk through the building blocks, take a moment to type in some of your thoughts as far as the different blocks. Okay, so here we go. The first layer of building blocks, customer actions. So what are the first things that you think about when you get ready to get groceries? Now, in the past, I would have said going to the grocery store, but now it's what do you think about when you need to get groceries? Sure, like your list, okay? Path to the store, your budget, very good. Using the app to plan your trip, coupons, best time to go, love that. So here already, and time to do it. So here already, we already have some things to consider that customers consider important as they get ready to get groceries. How many store layout, if you want to be efficient, get in and get out. Method, so are you going, or are you going to do curbside, or are you going to do delivery? Exactly. Perfect. Oh, floral and deli. I love that. You know, we're still buying those meal simples. Love those. Pop them in the oven. Delicious. All right. Planning meals for the coming week. Totally. That's right. The other thing for me is which wine bottles am I going to get a discount on if I buy 6? That's a big thing for me. All right, so let's talk about those touch points. Some of your answers kind of touched on these. So what are some of the touch points that customers interact with as they're getting ready to get groceries? App, parking lot, paper, right? The flyers. I think the parking lot is really important, and it's really interesting. So even at the beginning, especially during the height of the pandemic, was you get the hand sanitizer. You know, the evidence of staff at the front cleaning sanitizing the shopping carts, right? The line at the register. Perfect. Products off the shelf. Cool. Yeah, the empty shelves. I know we've been experiencing a lot of empty shelves recently. So let's move on to staff actions. So what are the actions that the staff are taking? Who are the staff? And what are they taking? What actions are they taking? The first one that comes to mind, because my AGB was the one at Huebner and Babcock, was the tamale lady. I used to love the tamale lady, and I almost felt like I had to go say goodbye to her when I moved away. Goodbye, tamale lady. She was a big part of my experience going to my AGB. So we have stockers, cashiers, managers, greeters. Perfect. All right, so then we also have some backstage staff. So this is where sometimes the line blurs, because you talk about the stockers, but a lot of times when they're in there, they usually don't do it necessarily during the day, but in recent months they have. And they're always willing to help you find the item that you need, right? And, you know, what is their attitude and what is their behavior? Warehouse room management, that's right. So how are they stocking? How are they making it efficient, the logistics efficient, in order to make sure that you're getting the product that you need when you need it? So we also have some friction points. So employees filling the curbside orders get in the way of store shoppers, right? Because they're pulling product as they go through the aisles for particular orders, but they have those big racks that are rolling. And so it makes it kind of difficult to get your cart around. And making sure that, especially in this time, the masking and the distancing is important. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. Oh, the bottom of the bobs, right? The bottom of the basket. That's also important. I always like those little stickers. Okay, so let's talk about supporting processes. And AGB has been doing a lot of this lately. So I'm going to give you a moment to talk about some supporting processes that might support running a grocery store. Marketing, vendors, product supply, point of sale machines, UI, UX digital teams, holiday blackout, no IT changes from Thanksgiving to New Year's. Perfect. Logistics. Great. Planning, utilities, right? Making sure that the lights are on. So when it's freezing outside, you can get some groceries. So the other couple of things, the Food and Drug Administration, right? The USDA, the US Department of Agriculture. They regulate, right, the food safety, when things can, how many days within expiration date can you still sell that item? How fresh does your produce need to be? Where do you source the produce? And HEB has been doing a lot in the last years with their marketing to elevate some of those support processes. You know, like you can see the vintners that are providing some of the wines to HEB. They talk about their strawberry providers, right? So there's a lot of different back end resources that go into having a grocery store. So milk testing, ooh, yuck. That sounds gross. The milk's tasting the milk. Yikes, that sounds terrible. So as you can see, there's a lot of different ways to collect ideas and filling out these blocks. And we've only spent like 15 minutes and we really don't know that much about, we have our own experience with HEB, but we don't really know all of their back-end systems. So we've already built out a straw man of a blueprint for HEB without having inside knowledge. And so you can see for your organization, building out a blueprint does take some time, but it's completely doable. You bring in the SMEs, the subject matter experts, the folks that deal with, that communicate with customers in different aspects of the business together, and then you can well document the blueprint, the service. So now that gets to the Q&A portion. So I'm excited for these questions. You can go ahead again, submit your questions via the chat screen, and then I'll do my very best to answer your questions.
I am going to invite you guys to come on screen. I think I am. Promote to panelist. If you do not want your camera on, no worries. You do you. I have been learning that a lot of people find it being on camera exhausting and distracting. So if you want to stay in the attendee mode, that's fine. If you want to join but have your camera off, also fine. Judy, you want to stop sharing so we can see the attendees?
Sure.
Sorry, I'm making my way through the list.
And I know I went through a lot of that, a lot of material very quickly. So please feel free to, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and submit those here. There's 2 new messages.
Yeah, Judy, I did have one. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Louise.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Can you say a little bit about moment of truth again? Because I captured a few things, but I wanted to just get that more, or hero moment, as you called it, Susan. When an experience becomes representative of the brand, and I think there was a little more to it than.
Right. So when you have a service, so a service moment was when you have those documented, and you can see from the beginning from the customer touch point, the customer actions, all the way to the back office and the supporting systems behind that. There are a collection of moments, right? A collection of building blocks, and a service moment is when that all comes together. Now, a key service moment is when, or a moment of truth, is when that particular interaction is going to make or break your brand. So it's going to be memorable, either plus or minus, right? And that's going to be their takeaway. So think about an amusement park, right? So you're going there for the rides because that's really exciting. But if on a hot summer day, you get stranded in the parking lot, or it's a really long walk to the first ride, or they're paying the cost for a soda is $5, those start to build up and create this, it undermines your experience. So yes, you might have really, really enjoyed that ride, but if all of these other things are degrading your service, so a lot of that stuff should disappear, right? So you shouldn't think about the parking lot, you shouldn't think about the walk, all of those things should kind of fall into the background. They want to be background, but if something drastically goes wrong with that, then that becomes a memorable point, and that can negatively impact your brand.
Yes. Okay, cool. And I'm kind of curious if that, because those, I assume those are moments within, your plan service, where I'm thinking about our HEB example and two things that happened during these different storms. That there was a grocery store, and I actually do not know the name, where they had to get rid of a whole lot of food, and they put a guard on the trash can and wouldn't let, they were turning people away. Where HEB lost power in this one place, people were shopping, and we've all heard that story, right? And they said, after a certain amount of time, they went, okay, everybody come to the front, take your food home. Just take it. We can't check you out, but you can have your food. And I think those are very memorable moments, but I don't know if they would be part of this service or just part of the experience, right?
So when you map out that experience, those would be the exception phases, the exception things that you need to step through. And I know that HEB really has done a lot of extra work over the years because of their hurricane readiness plans. Mm-hmm. Okay, and they were able to pivot those for the pandemic, and then again now 2 weeks ago with the ice storm. So they have been doing a lot of scenario playing, and so making sure that you consider, because that's the other key point, and thank you for bringing that up, Louise, is a lot of times we go through the happy path, and the happy path is fine, but again, making that service moment is when it's not happy, and what are you going to do about it when things go bad? Okay, what's your reaction? How are you going to handle?
I have to.
All right. So.
Oh, sorry.
Sure.
I'll stop.
I was going to look at some of these other questions. So any resources for learning more about service design? So there is my friend Jamin Hageman, he actually has a website, and I believe it's called Service Design Tools. And there's also a service design group, and I will get those to Susan to send out. I don't have those references handy, but just look up Service Design Tools, and he's probably going to be the first 2 or 3 websites that come up. And I don't know how to pronounce your name, Gizem. the Nielsen Norman Group also has a lot of articles and examples. So there's a couple of other resources, and then IDEO.org also has some tools to use.
Is
Yeah, service design tools. Oh, you did find it. Good. Service design tools. Yeah, that's really great.
Cool.
So one of my
And
questions.
thank you, everybody. I see a lot of my friends on here, so that's I'm very happy to see some friends as we go through here.
If you guys need to go, don't hesitate. But I do have another question, and it's one that we wrestle with on our projects. It's how do you choose the level of focus? Do you try to map something as big as customer experience at HEB, or do you pick a smaller slice to tackle?
Well, and I would say to that, it's good to try and go soup to nuts through entire service to document. And then once you have it documented, so what I zoomed in on was the recovery when there was an error, right? And so then you can look at like all the components that make up that recovery process and see what needs to be adjusted, right? And I think McD had a question. McD, what was your question?
Yeah, sorry. I was just talking to myself. My question was about when you're trying, sort of along the same lines of Susan's questions, how do you figure out when doing the process flow, you're making sure you're including everybody? And I know the obvious is, hey, if you touch this product, I'm talking more from like the political angle. Specifically, I remember being a consultant in a company, and they were talking about doing a new shipping thing. And my immediate thought was process flow. Let's see who hits what and what touches what. And when you change it here, what does it mean down the road? And he looked at me like I said the most, angriest thing in the world, took me aside after the meeting and said, how dare you? I'm like, sorry, what? How dare I try to get your organization to work together? So my question is more from that side of the thing. How do you handle, you as an outsider saying, you really need to include all your people, rather than them saying, no, I'll speak for them, or you know what I mean?
Right. Well, communication. And, sometimes it's difficult, especially when you don't always know everyone who's involved or who you might be accidentally excluding, right? So you have to work really hard with your partners to make sure that when you go in and you're talking to, focused on a particular experience, who all is involved. And sometimes it's, meetings before the meeting. There's some communication, trying to make sure that everyone's aware. And then having a participant, looking at the level of Zoom and maybe just having one participant from this, adjacent group, especially if it's a downstream group, that might need to participate. Because one of the other joys about that is if you have, so like when we did the workshop for security, we had a lot of technical designers in there, and we had, we kind of threw the net pretty wide. And what's really important is to have them bring the art of the possible with them, because you don't have that unless you cast that net, right? And I'm not a technical, I don't know how they were layering up these different devices and what the back end connections, the machine connections were, but they did. And so bringing them, up towards this activity up front really helps bring the art of the possible to the conversation, and then you get those innovation opportunities. I think Darling had a question. Darling?
Yeah, it's more of a comment to when I have interacted, I'm a consultant in training, when I have interacted with upper management, there are some personality types that get, embarrassed, or they have power control issues. So what I've learned is to hear what, to do some homework, and I don't know if you have or not, in terms of who this person is, who are the heads, who are the top management, or the people that are doing the decision making, and then listen to what they're saying, and then take something from what they're saying and incorporate that into what you're wanting to share, and say, so-and-so has a good point, and in order to expand this wonderful concept or idea of so-and-so, what I would like to suggest is this, and that. So it's pretty much making it sound like it's the idea of the person, such as the gentleman that was offended by your logic and you're wanting to include everyone, is to make that person have it be their idea. I don't know if it's making sense. I haven't eaten yet, so.
That is a very great point. And to be honest, when we first started working with this group, it seemed a little adversarial. And once we demonstrated what we were there to do, because nobody likes, I'm from design, I'm here to help, like nobody wants that. And so what we had to demonstrate to them was, we're on the same side. We all want a secure organization. We want to protect the data. And so we're all on the same team here. We're just a different way of looking at what you're building, is a little bit more insight to how to execute to that. And so that, like I said, nobody wanted to be the hole in the boat. So everybody really wanted to do this and do it well. And so, just making sure that you reiterate that and, have that be your lead into those conversations.
Tom typed a question into chat. I don't know if he's unable to come off mute or did he leave, but.
Okay, it says, in how many instances have you seen totally new services added that the team did not realize was missing? This is a really good question. And there was an experience I was working on a couple of years ago when we were working on the service desk. So when you had a technical problem, you called in and got some answers. And when I first started working on it, they're like, Judy, when are you going to get the website done? I'm like, you know what? The website's the least of your problems. Like that is, that's one point, that's an entry point, but that's not the bottom line. And so what came of that was there was a huge friction point, because the member service reps would call into the help desk and then they would not get the service they needed. And how the help desk agents were treating them, they would have gotten fired for if they had treated members that way, right? So there was a little disconnect on how that played out. And so one of the things that we did was some customer service training for the technical help desk agents that they had never had before. So that was not something that was on the list of things to do. It was not a bright, shiny object. It was a back-end training issue. And so that was an aspect of the service that had not been on the plan. And so helping those agents create empathy or understand what those folks on the phone were going through, because what they're ultimately doing is trying to do the business of the company, right? So that might be one example that we discovered.
Yeah. Hey, Judy, how are you?
Good. How are you, Tom?
I'm good. Yeah. So, and that was a great answer. And the context for my question is I'm actually working with someone here in Paris on a travel app. And we were kind of defining what the attributes of that app would be. And it came up very quickly. There's a lot of services that people expect now coming out of the pandemic for travel, and also in general. I think there's a lot of service flows that exist today in every realm, like the example of the grocery store, that coming out of the pandemic when everything's normal again, I think people's expectations are going to change. So I think new services as part of the existing service will have to be added. It'll be interesting.
Right. Yes, and this is a really good opportunity for innovation, where you look at different industries and how they solve the problem and see how that can be applied to whatever you're building. So look for
Right.
analogies for how other people, we call that analogous inspiration, right? Where you go look and see how someone else did it. And then you're like, oh, okay, I can apply some semblance of that to what I'm working on.
One of the things that comes up often in the analogous inspiration section of our strategy and design sprints is the pizza tracker concept that I think Domino's does really well. And it's really useful to look at that because it raises everybody's expectation of any time sensitive process. They internalize the idea that it's my right to know how long that is going to be. It's my right to know where the Uber driver is. How is he around the corner or is he on the other block? You know, is my pizza in the oven or is it, you know, in the car, right? So those expectations get raised and applied, because consumers and employees apply those expectations across the board. We all do it. So I love that tactic.
Yeah. Hey, thanks a lot. Those are great insights. Thank you.
Hey, Susan, why didn't you introduce that pizza tracker to the purchasing team? I think we need it.
Right?
Yep. That's a good idea. Does that feel,
Right.
does
Any
that feel
other
like a good stopping point?
Yeah, I think so. I think your cat is hungry.
Yeah, he's noisy for sure. Guys, thank you so much for coming. Don't forget that we are having another session every first Friday. The upcoming one is going to be writing in plain language. It has to do with accessibility, but not for the blind and deaf, but for everybody. And it's surprisingly hard to write shorter and more plain language. And I've got a really great expert coming to talk to us on April 2nd. If you have ideas for other sessions that we can do in the UX digital design and marketing space, we've got between us a big network of really smart people, and I can invite speakers on a topic of your choice. So thank you all for coming, and we will see you next month. Thank you so much, Judy.
Thank you so much.
Really enjoyed this.
You bet.
Great. Thank
Thank
you, Judy.
you for having me. I really appreciate it.